The right of holding slaves is clearly established in the Holy Scriptures, both by precept and example. I draw my warrant from the Scriptures of the Old and New Testaments to hold the slave in bondage. The extracts from Holy Writ unequivocally assert the right of property in slaves. Slavery was recognized accordingly by Christ and his apostles. They condemned all intermeddlers with it. These quotes come from a time in history where slave owners were desperately fighting back against those who wanted to end slavery. The moral zeitgeist was shifting and slavery was on its way out. But these men represented a very large part of the population that felt that slave owners had a pretty good weapon in their arsenal. This book. Let's take a peek.
The Holy Bible, the King James Version. The second book of Moses, called Exodus, chapter 21.
Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. If the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him unto the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. If a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. And if a man smite the eye of his servant, or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth, or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go for his tooth's sake.
Pretty precise rules, aren't they? Let me first address the various attempts at defense by the religious when these types of verses are cited to them. The most common reply is something like this. Biblical slavery was more servitude than slavery, as you would imagine, for example, in the Deep South. And a reply like this. Slavery itself was different. Many slaves sought to pay off debts which they could not repay. Slavery wasn't permanent. Old debts would be discarded and servants would be freed. So the argument is that slavery is more like being an indentured servant. In other words, slaves were basically working for their masters and paying off their debts. Just type in Bible, slavery into Google, and you can read these defenses for yourself. But let me give you an example of how ridiculous this indentured servant defense is. Hello, Peter. What's happening? I'm going to need you to go ahead and come in tomorrow and Sunday too, okay? We lost some people this weekend. I smiteth a few of your coworkers with a rod, and luckily for the company, they made it a day or two before they died. Anyways, we sort of need to play catch up. Oh, and how do you like that wife I gave you? I hear you guys are pregnant. You know, Peter, that child is my property. You know that, right? Right. Thanks. But here's something the religious also have to deal with. These passages from Exodus that hint that a slave can go free at some point, they only apply to Jewish slaves. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, Israel tried to look after their own and really tried to limit inhumane acts to non-Hebrews. As brutal as you could be to a Hebrew slave, The limits for non-Hebrews were not given the same restrictions. For example, Leviticus 25 clearly states,
Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property and make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly.
and you may ask, well, how do you go about getting slaves from other places? Is there a slave mart in the suburbs of Jericho?
As you approach a town to attack it, first offer its people terms for peace. If they accept your terms and open the gates to you, then all the people inside will serve you in forced labor. But if they refuse to make peace and prepare to fight, you must attack the town. When the Lord your God hands it over to you, kill every man in the town. You may keep for yourselves all the women, children, livestock, and other plunder. You may enjoy the spoils of your enemies that the Lord your God has given you.
Good old Yahweh working up a number 6 on them.
Number 6? I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, that's where we go riding into town. A whopping and a whopping. Every living thing that moves within an inch of its life. Except the women folks, of course.
You spare the women?
No, we rape the shit out of them at the number 6 dance later on.
Marvelous. That's so creative. Ah!
But there's one last defense we hear anytime we bring up the evils of the Old Testament. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with deep respect and fear. Serve them sincerely as you would serve Christ. Christians who are slaves should give their masters full respect so that the name of God and his teachings will not be shamed. In a parable in Luke 12, Jesus talks about a slave who knows the master's will and does not do what the master wants, stating that he will be beaten with many blows. Look, if slavery is so wrong, Jesus had every chance to stop it, to speak out against it, but he did not. Slavery occurred during the time of Jesus. Slavery continued after Jesus. It wasn't until nearly 2,000 years later that we put an end to it. But guess what never changed? The Bible. The words in the book were the same 1,500 years ago as they are today. And that's why when you hear idiots like the good reverends from the beginning of this video say what they did, you can't deny that they were at least backing up their terrible claims with chapter and verse. So what changed from then until now? It wasn't the Bible. Those verses in both the Old and New Testaments are now ignored by even their followers. It was us. It was mankind. We moved on from that. God wasn't changing, so we did. And it cannot be driven home any harder than by the great abolitionist himself, Frederick Douglass. When speaking about the transition from being a slave to being a free man, Frederick Douglass said, "I prayed for 20 years but received no answer until I prayed with my legs."